to the other side of the loom, to the front of the loom, and show you, one of Master Weaver Laura Fry's sayings is a warp under tension. A thread under tension is a thread under control. So I want to tension my warps. I take a simple loop of cotton string that I've tied a knot in. I go over the warp, the bundled warp, and I pull the knotted end through, and I've got a loop that never slips. Well, on silk it might slip because silk is slippery. And using an S-hook, I hang a water bottle from it. My loops of cotton live on my water bottles. So I take the loop, I lay it on top, I pull the knot through, and I hang my bottle from it. One of these is a milk jug, the other is a vinegar jug. I prefer the vinegar because it's heavier plastic, and even when I drop it, it doesn't break. I've broken a few of the milk jugs. So this applies tension to my warps, so I don't have to worry about anything slipping. And now I am ready to start beaming. I take the lee sticks off, the textile loops off of the lee sticks. I push those lee sticks up to the top of my castle, and I can start winding. Oh, but you should see the track that my warp makes. So it goes from my apron rod at the back of the loom, it goes up over the castle, down under the front beam, and up over the warping valet and down to those jugs. My warping valet is a 1-inch dowel that I have suspended from the ceiling with a couple of chains. I chose to use chains that I can adjust the height of because I'm a short person. I want to be able to touch the top of that dowel if I need to adjust my warps. For instance, here, this warp got twisted. I want to turn it. I need to be able to touch the top of that dowel to do it. If a taller person was going to warp the loom, the valet, they might want it to be a lot higher. In addition to the beauty of being able to move those chains higher and lower, it can also move from one place to another. So I have 2 eye hooks in the ceiling here, and it's important that they be on beams, not just through your plasterboard. I also have 2 eye hooks in the ceiling here, so when I want to warp this little counterbalance loom, all I have to do is move that warping valet from that position over here to my counterbalance loom, and I can use the exact same process to warp this loom. You'll see that the top roller bar is much shorter than the top bar of my Maycumber. It's okay. It all works the same. You could do the same process if you had a low castle loom. Your warp would just have a slightly smaller path that it would travel. The other thing that you can do, which is in fact what Laura Fry does, is you could move your lee sticks. I'm not going to actually do it, but I'll explain it. You could move your lee sticks up over here, under there. Especially if you had your warping valet higher, if you put your lee sticks into it here, you would not need to move the lee sticks as much. I'm a short person. I just do what works for me. You will do what works for you. So I step on my brake release so I'm not hitting that release. hitting every tooth of the brake with every turn of the handle. My leaf sticks have gone down to my back beam. I just push them up to the top and crank some more until it's time to put in a separator. I know people use all different kinds of things for separators, and I have tried several different kinds of things for separators. This paper works for me, so I keep using it. I crank until my leaf sticks are down at the back beam. I remove the choke ties when I come to them. I push the leaf sticks up, and I could crank some more, but you see my water bottles are getting up close to my valet. So I need to move them down to the bottom. I'll show you how I do that. Lift off by the S-hook. I simply loosen that circle, that cotton circle, move it down, tighten it up, hang the water bottle again. You want your water bottles or your weights, whatever you're using for weights, you really want them to not be touching the floor, to be as close to the floor as you can get them. This one is in fact touching the floor, which means it doesn't apply quite as much tension, so I'll just move my holding loop up a little bit. Especially if only one of them is touching the floor, you end up with uneven tension between your two bouts of warps. And if you're a weaver at all, you know what happens when you have uneven tension. Not a good thing. So my water bottles are at the floor, my leaf sticks are at the top, and I crank. Push up the leaf sticks and crank. Push up the leaf sticks and crank. You can shut it off. So this is roughly a 9-yard warp for towels, and I've wound most of it on the back beam. You can see I'm near the end of my warps here, and I have a fair amount more that I want to wind. So I have these longer strings, and this one is just cotton. This one is also cotton, but part of it is shoelace. And I have knots tied at various random lengths on these strings so that I can hang my water bottles at various points. So I want to use my longer strings now so that I can get the most length of my warp possible wound on the back beam. And I use the same process. I just do it with a longer string. And now I figure out what's the lowest knot I can use to not touch the floor with my longer string. And these two longer strings are not identical. That doesn't matter. What matters is that your water bottles are hanging at close to the same height. You'll see, this one is closer to the floor. That's okay, but they're both near the bottom. And I come back and I wind. And I my wine. And my water bottles, you can see the knots are all the way up to the warping valet, but the water bottles are not. They are still only about halfway up, and I can now move my water bottles down to the length that I have and just keep winding. I need to grab another roll of paper here. And who has as much room as she'd like in her studio to move around? Not me. My knots went over the warping valet, but the water bottles still have room to travel. The water bottles are pretty close to the top now. I don't really want those S-hooks to hit the dowel. Guess what I learned from experience? If the S-hooks hit the dowel, they're likely to crash on the floor and the milk jug's likely to break and make a mess. So I unhook them from over the valet. I find a closer knot. I took the warp from under the front beam to over the front beam. I find a closer knot. I hang my water bottle. And I won't get anywhere near as many cranks of the back beam now, because my path that those bottles are going to follow is much shorter than it was. But I can get enough to get the warp as close to where I want it to be as possible. This is why I have all of these knots. That one's a little too low. And at this point, those warps are probably about as close as I want them to be for threading my loom. So I'm going to, again, put those Texalve loops over my Lee sticks. I'm going to release my water bottles and pull the warp under the castle and over the shafts. And you can see that there's not tension on them now, which isn't the world's best thing. It would be great if I could have tension all the way, but life is not ideal, right? We do what we need to do. And yeah, I could hang the water bottles again, but I'm only going to go probably another foot or so before I'm done. And again, my Lee sticks can move back and forth to get those warps where I want them to be. I don't really know how long it took me to wind on a 9-yard warp from start to finish, but maybe an hour. And that includes spreading it in the rattle and stopping to get a drink and all of those other things. So if there's anything here that helps you, great. Use whatever methods work for you to get a warp on your loom that is evenly tensioned and will let you weave without problems. Thanks.